What does Jordan Mason bring to the Vikings, and can he even be RB1? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, hi, ho, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtagged everydayers so very much. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today on the show, I want to spend most of it talking about Jordan Mason. I want to evaluate what I noticed on him when I really got a chance to kind of sit down, deep dive a couple of games, and get a sense for his habits, his strengths, his weaknesses. I want to share what I learned with you, as well as kind of speculate on what about the world where Jordan Mason turns into the actual RB1. What would that take? Is that possible? What is it about him that makes that possible or not? And how does it compare to Aaron Jones? I found some really interesting comparisons I want to share with you. Really quick, I'm going to go over a couple of things of news, and then we'll spend the rest of the show talking about Jordan Mason. Good? So the big news, is that the Vikings signed Jeff Okudah. He was in for a visit on Monday. He signs on Tuesday. I don't have any contract details. I doubt it's going to be very large because he basically is not a starter in this league anymore. I know he's a name that you know because he went third overall, but he hasn't been a starter in this league, or at least wasn't last year. He played a couple of games with injuries in Atlanta, but that's about it. He is the kind of name that you have to go for when you enter an offseason with like two corners under contract. This is why you don't want to do that. This is why you don't want to have everybody leaving all at the same time, because you end up having to kind of bring in your Jeff Okudahs just to fill the room out. I would not anticipate Jeff Okudah to start. I mean, he'll be able to compete for it. He'll have every chance in the world, but he's like a Fabian Moreau replacement kind of type, where it's like, well, maybe he'll make the team. We'll see how he competes with like Trivier Thomas. Speaking of special teams guys, the Vikings are really bringing in a lot of like mostly core special teamer types. I mean, these guys are going to provide some depth, but wide receiver Tim Jones also joins. This is not going to be your wide receiver 3. Okay. This guy's not going to like compete. He's not going to like beat out Jalen Naylor. At least there's nothing in his career that shows that he's going to be able to do that. Again, everybody's welcome to try. But he was mostly a special teamer for the Jags for the first 3 years of his deal. He was an undrafted free agent a few years ago. So he comes in, it's another like special teamer. This is a kind of low level, like kind of trims around the edges, or not trims, but these little like kind of zhuzhes around the edges that are what you're doing when you're kind of waiting on the bigger dominoes to fall elsewhere in the league, namely Cam Robinson and whatever happens on the quarterback side. Also, the Vikings hired Charlie Frye. You might remember him as a Browns quarterback. My favorite Charlie Frye memory was that he was the quarterback of the Browns week 1 of 2009. He was in absolute hell all day, and that was, what a beautiful memory, the first week of that season, right? But since then, he's been in the coaching ranks. He's been on the QB coach OC train for his whole career. He was the offensive coordinator for Brian Flores for a hot second when he was in Miami in 2021. He spent one season there. He was not well received by Miami Dolphins fans. If you ask Dolphins fans about Charlie Frye, you would get similar answers to if you asked Vikings fans about John DeFilippo. Not necessarily for the same reasons, but the same level of vitriol. So that is not working out. And for the greatest evidence I have on that is that he is signed as a defensive assistant. This is low-level stuff, and this guy is a guy trying to kind of resurrect his career, I think, after maybe flaming out at like FAU, but as a defensive assistant, a guy that Brian Flores knows and maybe respects, maybe he can find, as like a defensive pass game coordinator, right? Calling coverages and stuff. Maybe there's a talent there. So that's like one of the assistants. Also, by the way, they got their Grant Udinski replacement some time ago, Jordan Traylor. If you missed that, I don't think I mentioned that on that show, so there that is. Okay. Jordan Mason. He was an undrafted rookie in 2022. So he's been with the 49ers for 3 years. They tendered him and then traded him after the latest like Kyle Shanahan generated running back did well, and they traded him here to Minnesota. He was playing on the tender, or was scheduled to play on the tender, and now they've signed Jordan Mason to another deal, so he's going to play out that first year of the tender and then the next two on the extension. So 3 years of Jordan Mason. What does this mean for the Vikings? Who can he be to the Vikings? I will start with the bottom line, which is that I like Jordan Mason a lot. I was worried that I was overreacting to the biggest exposure that I had to him, which was the Vikings game. If you remember that week 2 Vikings game, he killed the Vikings all up and down the field. The run defense for the Vikings was one of the only things that didn't go really, really, really well that day. Ultimately, the Vikings got too many good plays on Brock Purdy and like kind of made it not matter. But Jordan Mason really gashed him that day. And I was a little bit worried that like I'm overexposed to one good game. What about the rest of them, right? So I pulled the 2 games that he had the most action in, which were week 1 in Monday Night Football and week 4 against the Jets and Patriots, respectively. That gave me, I think, I was just looking for volume. I was just looking for carries, right? Because with a running back, the matchups, the quality of the guys across from them, like you don't often like mano-a-mano a guy. So like, well, that D tackle is bad is like not really going to change anything. There's kind of blocks in front of you that worked or they didn't. And you don't really have to care who's who. So I'm not too worried about, like a roster like the Patriots accidentally leading us to a false sense of security. And actually that Patriots game was not as great in my opinion. I'll get to the reasons why in time. We got the rest of the show to talk about this, but he has the headline for me is total zone fit, right? Understands the footwork, understands the concepts, makes the decisions with the right timing. There's a toss play thing that I talked about on yesterday's show that somebody asked me about. There was like a Baldy's breakdown, I guess, about how he's good at toss plays. I can see it on the toss plays. Keeping his feet right. He's good with his hands. Good as a receiver, by the way. I like the way he catches. There was in one of these games, I think it was in the Patriots game, there was one where he actually had to catch a ball outside his frame, a couple where he just had to catch one right in his frame and not drop it, and good at all that. Pass pro, willing, I guess, but obviously he's a running back, a little bit small. There was one whiff on there I didn't like, but all that stuff around the edges. The headline is zone fit. Cool. Love it. Makes decisions fast, bursts through the hole. Kind of all you need. But there are a couple of things that he does that I really, really like. And then there's also a decision thing that I think goes with the athleticism. So the athleticism to me is the reason he went undrafted, right? If I'm going to like wax poetic about this guy, the first question I think that must be running through everybody's head is why didn't he get drafted then? If he's so good, why didn't a team ever want to spend a draft pick on him? And hey, look, it's a running back, right? So a lot of good running backs can start out as undrafted guys just because the value of that position is in such a basement that, if you're just a reasonable running back and you have a lot of skills, you're good. But if you have anything like wrong with your profile, you are kind of going to fall out of the draft just by virtue of that position, right? So for Jordan Mason, it was his athleticism. If you look at he tested bad. He had bad agility drills. 40 was uninspiring. And you can see that on tape. That does exist. But that's your reason, right? Like that's why he went undrafted, and he's managed to find a way to be good despite that. And something I say, and I will continue to say as we get more and kind of transition more into like draft stuff, is like there is something to be said for guys that come with prepackaged with the solutions to their own problems. So you take a smaller corner, but he's really good at contested catches. Well, he kind of comes with the solution to his own problems. What's wrong with being a small corner? Well, you're going to be bad at contested catches. But if that guy's good at contested catches anyways, we no longer have to care that he's a small corner. And with Jordan Mason, his footwork is really smooth. You can really tell what he has worked on. And the way that he has worked on putting a foot in the ground, cutting and going, on kind of bending runs back is a little bit tougher for him. That's where the agility comes in. But the way he like jump cuts and the way that he keeps his like gyroscope, if you will, like the slalom thing I talked about a lot with Dalvin Cook, all that stuff is what made him successful in San Francisco. So I want to go more in depth on what I'm talking about there, on both the footwork thing, the slalom thing, as well as the cutback, the bending cutback vision and kind of agility part of it that might not be so good, and all in the context of, well, can he usurp Aaron Jones? Is that a thing that can happen? Obviously, a question that is maybe you probably have an answer that you expect, but is still probably worth going through the process of trying to find it. So that'll all be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's Locked On Vikings episode is brought to you by Gametime, the best place to find last-minute tickets. Imagine watching your favorite college basketball team live in the tournament and actually being there, feeling the energy, the ebbs and flows of the game. Or even if you're not into college basketball, let Gametime Picks make it easier to find better value for tickets to sports or anything, concerts, comedy, whatever. If you check the Gametime app, there are amazing deals all over the place, and the lowest priced guarantee means that Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find the same section and row somewhere else at a lower price. They have seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, plus the best customer service program in this industry, and I can vouch for that personally. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Moving on here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. If you want video of all this stuff, you can find patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. A Jordan Mason video is coming out before the end of the week. I'm like already more than halfway done with it. But in the meantime, you can check a Will Fries and Ryan Kelly video to see all the reasons that I'm excited about those guys. I'm digging a lot of these free agents, man. I'm like happy. There's a lot of the stuff that the Vikings have done that I think are just really good decisions so far. So, Jordan Mason, how does he differ from Aaron Jones? I'll start with with the things that they have in common. And I think quick decisions and bursting through the hole are things that both of these running backs do. And those are two things that I think are like vitally important for a running back. If you want to know, okay, the difference between the running backs we have now and like Alexander Mattison. Alexander Mattison can make quick decisions. I think his vision was fine, but he could not physically get through that hole fast enough, often enough to get into the second level and turn those into explosives. So a lot of runs would be blocked up properly, but he wouldn't be able to capitalize on it. The hole would close up too fast. And it's just because you're asking O-line to just like hold that for longer than everybody else has to ask their O-lines to do because you got slow running back. That is why, in 2023, my takeaway was, the running backs are the problem with the running game, which is something of a hot take, right? Because they're not supposed to matter. But last year, the efficiency went up. It wasn't perfect, but it went up. And of course, losing Darisaw, they've had other problems on their O-line that, we don't need to relitigate, but the running backs no longer were the problem, and it helped. We've now got two guys like that. That's awesome, right? Just insurance. It's cool. But the reason that that's the first thing that jumps out to me. But the reason that Jordan Mason, part of the reason he can get through, he is not a zoom accelerator. His tested athleticism showed you that, and it looks the same on tape. This dude is not going to just hit the gas and run through, insert your favorite young running back here, but rather there's a contact balance thing here, and there is a footwork thing. So when you're a running back and you're trying to get through a hole, a lot of times that requires you to choose an aiming point different from the actual hole itself. Running backs aren't just seeing a hole and hitting it. A lot of times they're going a little bit out of their way to try to lure a linebacker out of position or get a defensive lineman to cross face the wrong way, or other ways, manipulate whatever defender it looks like is going to tackle you, and then you cross over and you try to open the hole for yourself. Running backs make their own space sometimes. And when you do that, that means you have to get out of position and then back into position really quickly. like without really losing any momentum, because the hole that you're actually trying to create here is going to close up in the snap of a finger. So what that means is that you need a little bit of dissonance between your upper body and your lower body. That is to say, where your feet are going, sometimes you need to show that your upper body is in a different place from where your feet are actually taking you. That is where I talk about the slalom thing. If you look at like a slalom skier and how they're often complete, like parallel to the ground, right? That kind of flexibility and balance is this, like, there's this very similar kind of athleticism that is required for running backs. Dalvin Cook was awesome at this. And a lot of the best moments of Dalvin Cook's career in Minnesota were because of that exact kind of athleticism and flexibility. Jordan Mason does this too, and it rocks. And so does Aaron Jones. Like, this is just a thing the Vikings have now in both of their running backs, and we get to be really happy about it. What that means is that they get to be heady. They get to have ideas and do them and make their lineman blocks better, right? If Blake Brandel misses a block and gets beat the wrong way, Jordan Mason is going to be able to make him right by using that kind of footwork and sort of, gyroscoping his way around. But what that also means is tighter holes don't feel as tight because you can move your feet out of the way without having to take necessarily a wider path, like in totality, if you have that sort of the dissonance between your upper and your lower half. If somebody's trying to dive at you and make an ankle tackle, there's a beautiful rep that's going to be in the Patreon video from, I think it was the Jets game, where, a defender just dives at his ankles and totally should have him, but he is able to kind of widen out his feet, but without widening out his upper body and bringing his momentum, like without just like drifting the thing to the outside so much that he brings, I think it's like a corner, or it's like an edge rusher, like a tight end block that he's also still trying to stay inside of. So it's like this really, really tight, like balancing act. And that sort of footwork can help you. One thing that you can get in trouble with when you're a running back, and this is not something that applies to our two guys, which is good. When you get like, I call them like jump cut guys. Guys that only jump cut are kind of putting themselves behind the 8 ball. And that's not to say that it can't work, because Adrian Peterson was this. Like his jump cuts were like the whole point of him. Bit of a special case, maybe not the median example, but if you want a different one, Ashton Jeanty. Ashton Jeanty is a jump cut guy. Everything he does is a jump cut, and even subtle movements, it's just that's the footwork he knows for how to change direction. But the thing about a jump cut is it slows you down, it's long, it takes a while, and it's really difficult to do subtly. It's really difficult to control. Like if you're trying to jump cut across 3 gaps, a jump cut is great for you. If you're trying to just like kind of show that you're on the shoulder of the guard and then just get to the other shoulder of the guard, a jump cut is not your best tool. But if it's the only tool you have and you have to do like a tiny little jump cut, it's like awkward, it's clunky, it slows you down, it gets you in trouble. And if you want to look at this happening to Ashton Jeanty all the time, look at their game against Penn State, the playoff game that they lost. Penn State had a much quicker D-line than a lot of the guys that he saw in the Mountain West or on like Oregon. They actually had a much more complete unit, and crucially a better secondary than Oregon had. I know they had like Derek Harmon over there in Oregon, but they ran away from him a lot in that game. And suddenly all that, set up and jump and this like gallopy almost, it starts to look footwork, really started to get him in trouble. So that's one thing I really love about Jordan Mason, that he has that slalom tool, and it helps him really smoothly get upfield. And because he is a decisive enough running back, he can take a zone toss play, right? That is going, very east-west, and cut that thing upfield decisively and smoothly, but without it being a jump cut, without it being a fully committed thing. Whereas if something does change in the middle of that footwork, he still has all his momentum, but he crucially still has all of his control. That is the key to a lot of the big runs you remember from Jordan Mason, earlier in the year before he started getting hurt as well. That's not it. That's not the end of the stuff that I like about Jordan Mason, because there is just a burst to him. Among this not so great athleticism is a reasonable 10 split of 1.57. For a running back, that's about 80th or 79th, 80th percentile. That's not bad. It's just that the 40-yard dash itself, a 4.58, not as good, right? By the way, I'm using percentile taken from the relative athletic score system, but those are percentiles among like all college players, including the myriad of players that don't get drafted or even invited to a camp. So just being average doesn't mean you're going to be average, in the NFL. That means you're going to be average among people who like did the tests, which like that's a much bigger data set, and you have to be pretty high to get up in those scores. Or to get actually like on the field, right? So that 10 split will work. The agility scores, a 4.4 shuttle, a 7.193 cone, those are not good enough. And that agility problem also leads Jordan Mason to, I think, the thing that he's not good at, and to be honest, the reason that I don't think he will overtake Aaron Jones, but it's probably worth talking out. So we'll do that next on Locked On Vikings.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Moving on with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Bending a run back is a very specific footwork, and Jordan Mason is not comfortable doing it. You can tell. It's a little bit choppy. It's a little bit clunky. And the real tell is that there are pretty good cutback lanes that he'll decline when he's got too much momentum, because the actual slowdown and change of direction is the part where he is not as good. Once he's up to his speed, he's up to his speed. So he drives like a little bit like a big tractor. He's not that he's like big and slow, but once he gets going, actually stopping, like if you try to turn that thing at full speed, you're going to tip it over. You know what I mean? That is probably a too unkind of a metaphor, because the speed does turn out fine. Means, maybe he'll get hawked on a big long run, but like who cares, right? If you're already out there in the second level, you're already getting an explosive. But what I'm talking about is, so again, take like a toss play, which the 49ers just did a lot of in those games, probably for D-line, or interior O-line reasons, right? Like they don't really like their center very much, I don't think. But take a toss play where you get your momentum you go from 0 to 60 before you turn upfield on those a lot of the times. You're trying to like get the edge. And let's say you don't get the edge, but you do find a cutback lane. You've got to stutter your feet and stop. The best players at that stutter your feet and stop thing are going to be wide receivers. They drill it all the time. 1, 2, 3 steps. That's what you want. 1, 2, 3 steps, you should be able to stop your momentum as a receiver, and you sink your hips into it, and you really like kind of slam on the brakes when you're trying to like break off a route, right? Running backs aren't trying to slam on the brakes. They're trying to just get going the other direction, so they'll bend it. They'll do different footwork where they will lean down almost like a Olympic like racing skater, like a speed skater, they'll like bend their shoulder down, or do it like almost like an edge rusher will underneath a tackle. I love all the little parallels between positions in terms of like biomechanics and stuff. I don't know. I nerd out about it, but they'll do that, and then they'll chop their feet and then try to get back into that acceleration. That choppy feet thing is not smooth for Jordan Mason. It gets a little gallopy on him. Instead of going, chop, 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 it's a little like ba-dum. And that means that he doesn't slow down as quickly as he could, and he doesn't get back up to speed as quickly as he could. And it's not a huge thing. And like he still can cut back. There's actually a great touchdown against the New York Jets that he finds a cutback lane, and it's beautiful, and that's awesome. Like it's absolutely still a tool in his bag. It's not like he can't do it, but when he does it, it's a little slow, and sometimes a window will close up on him. that also means that he gets a little bit of the bouncies, as in he's trying to bounce everything outside because he doesn't feel comfortable. Like so much of running back is on feel, like you're making these decisions. You don't like calculate these decisions. You don't get time to sit there and go, well, if I go there and the linebacker goes there, what happens? No, you're doing this on instinct and feel and muscle memory and all your drills and all your training and all your practice, right? And that means that if your instinct is telling you that I know how fast I'm going to, cut back and it's not going to be fast enough, you're not going to do it. You're going to try to bend things back. But that takes, I think, opportunities away from him and it takes meat off the bone. This is a problem that does not apply to Aaron Jones. He's very good at finding that cutback lane. In fact, I think some of his best runs have been finding that cutback lane here, if I recall. And even though Jordan Mason is younger, he is coming off of an injured season, but he doesn't have nearly the history that Aaron Jones has. To compare these two, there's a lot that they have in common that if you're going to try to like compete them against, like really pit them against each other, it cancels out, right? Like they both have the burst, they check that box. They both have the vision, they check that box. They both have, they both know what they're doing in pass protection. They both know how to catch the ball. Okay, they check the box. And by the way, we're already very happy about this duo just by all of that box checking. But if we really want to pit them against each other, I think the key difference is when Jordan Mason is cutting back, the footwork is clunky, it slows him down, and those cutback lanes, they close up quick, and sometimes you miss an opportunity. But that doesn't, like the path for Jordan Mason to become RB1 is the one where, that's something that can be improved upon, right? Like that might be an athleticism thing, like it's just kind of hard with poor physical agility. Like if you're the kind of guy that's just not going to run a good 3-cone, it's just going to be kind of tough to do that. Like there is just like a God-given thing to that you're just never going to have. But you can improve that footwork. You can hopefully improve that. You can make those decisions faster. But more than that, the opportunity is going to happen if Aaron Jones gets hurt and Jordan Mason gets the chance to become the bell cow. And then, hey, have a couple of hot games and then you don't relinquish the job, right? So all in all, I am very excited about Jordan Mason. There are, I think, the real seeds of a running back that works. And remember, he's in here for 3 years. Aaron Jones is in here for 2 years. So that 2027 thing, we're a long way away from this, but in theory, the way we're looking at it, if no rookies join in the draft in the first round or whatever, we're looking at a possible Jordan Mason takes over and becomes the bell cow a little later in his career. I think that he has the skill set to justify that, but he has to play well enough in his time to dissuade the Vikings from bringing in someone even younger to then, in turn, take it from him. That's all like very 30,000 mile view. Like, don't worry about that too much. Just be happy. The Vikings have 2 good zone running backs. That's a duo that'll work for me. They cover it. It's redundancy in a good way. And I will take this moment because I've got a minute here. I'll take this moment to make a grander point about redundancy. I saw this was a fantasy take, and I forget who it was from, and it's not important who it was from anyways. But it was a fantasy take. I think it was either on Twitter or Blue Sky, like somewhere on social media, about how the Vikings have 2 similar of receivers. Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson are 2 similar to each other. They're both, more downfield threats. They both struggle with physical coverage. They both kind of want to be in the slot, which is like a narrative that he was holding on to from Justin Jefferson's draft. Don't worry about it. It was a fantasy analyst. You don't have to take them seriously. But I think that idea that, well, if you, like, I see that idea all the time, right? And I've even done that a little bit too, because I want the Vikings to have like a gadget guy like Rondale Moore. Although, if his knee sucks, his knee sucks. So they let him out of the building, and he's now on his like 3rd visit. So I'm going to guess everybody's not liking the medical check. But, somebody in that mold, right? Like that kind of yak guy, because that would be a really cool thing to kind of, really stress up front defenders while Addison and Jefferson stretch the downfield defenders. Great stuff. But it's not a necessary thing. And I think too often we look at, well, they've got Mike Williams. He's a big receiver. Now they need a small, fast receiver. You don't need to catch them all. It's not Pokemon. Having receivers just need to be good. They just need to all have a game that they are good at. And if it's the same game for everybody, you can build an offense on that. And if it's a different game for everybody, you can build an offense on that. And I think it's just mostly up to the OC to make sure that they have their tools all in the right place there. But I think it's the same thing with running backs. Look, you can have the Thunder and Lightning deal, the Sonic and Knuckles like the Lions have, with a fast guy in Gibbs and a kind of a bigger bruiser in David Montgomery. Like, good for you. You can have that. That works. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with having two guys that are, bursty, good one cut and go read running backs. Like, you don't need that. There's no moment where you're going to like really long for a different style of running back. You're going to long for fresh legs, but you're not going to long for a different style. There's no type of defense that counters the zone, one cut and go running back that doesn't also counter a more gadget back or a big bruiser or something like that's not, because they're both really balanced. There's not going to be like a rock, paper, scissors that you just, oh no, we just don't have the right running backs to answer this defense. It's just going to be, we're just going to be able to get fresh legs in there, but with the same style. That'd be great. Ain't nothing wrong with that. All right. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.